Welcome to the official podcast of DogsDaily.com, a Sports Illustrated channel.
Gets to the edge. Adonai Mitchell will send the Dogs home to the championship game.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you're in the right place.
Anthony Edwards with the jam. Are you kidding me?
Hosted by Dogs Daily writers Jeremiah Stoddard, Kyle Funderburk, and Jonathan Williams.
Here's a pitch. Hit high out into right center with some carry. It's got a chance. This ball is out of here. Tucker Bradley has won it.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Classic City Sports. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard, Jonathan Williams here with you. It was a fun one in Athens this weekend. Got to beat down on South Carolina back in Athens after 2 years ago when they, snuck up on Georgia there in a game that Kirby Smart came out and said, there was a video that surfaced where he said that they weren't ready before that game based on like warm-ups on there. So it was a really fun one to sit back and watch. One, I was there and I saw the warm-ups this week. And I was down on the field area, and there was definitely the energy that he said was lacking the time before. It was definitely there, so it was fun to see it before the game even kicked off, that you could tell that there was a mentality of being out there just looking for blood, basically. Like they were there to do damage. So it was a fun one to watch and get into there. But we're going to go through, the offense, the defense, and then we'll shift over. We're a quarter way through the season, so we're going to sit there and kind of look at Georgia through the first 3 games, and then we'll look at college football as a whole through 3 games and just kind of break down where everything is, because a lot of stuff has changed in 3 weeks in college football since we sat down like before the season kicked off. So what was your first impression, Jonathan, of the offense? I'll say we'll start with offense.
Offense was super efficient. I mean, we're finally seeing consecutive games now where Georgia's put together a really efficient day on offense. They looked really good against UAB, but it's also really nice to see them do it against an SEC opponent. No, South Carolina is not going to be one of your blue bloods from the SEC by any means. They're a rebuilding program at the time, but nonetheless, it's still SEC talent. These guys are still very good college football players. So still really good to see them do it against somewhat SEC competition. So they're really efficient. They looked really good. Had a few mistakes. Stetson came in for a series, 2 interceptions. Then JT Daniels had one about midway through the game. But other than that, I mean, really no complaints from the offense. I mean, maybe some areas, of course, to clean up in the run game, up in the offensive line. Those are still questions, of course. There's still some struggles there. But wide receivers look good. Adonai Mitchell had an absolute career game. It looks like he had his breakout game of what you would classify as with 77 yards of receiving and a touchdown. And then just all around, just a really good day for the offense. I mean, really nothing to complain about. They put up points, and that's all you really needed from them, and they got the job done.
Absolutely. And it was one of those things that, everyone wanted to see Georgia's offense be more explosive, right? Because in the offseason, all we talked about and everyone talked about was this Georgia offense is going to be different than what we had seen before. So everyone was prepared and ready to see that. You start the season off against Clemson and you see, a 0 touchdown, 3-point offensive performance in that game that they win. So everyone walks away happy with it as a fan base because that was a big game against a top 5 opponent. But then you go into UAB and at that point you expect to score a lot of points and stuff quickly. And they did. They did exactly that. They put up, we talked about this. They were 5 for 5 with 4 touchdown passes in, just over a quarter worth of football or something like that.
Literally can't be any more efficient than that.
Like 250 yards passing or something crazy in that stat line for Stetson Bennett in that game. So you can't be much more efficient or much more explosive than that. So it was nice to see that translate over into a game against South Carolina, which is an SEC opponent. Now, granted, they are towards the bottom tier of the SEC as far as the overall, powerhouse level that they are. So I'm not putting too much on that in general, but it is nice to see it translate over to a SEC game after you played a mid-major opponent the week before. So I was really excited to see them score quickly on big plays. The first few touchdowns were scored on, 20 plus, yard touchdowns. The first 3 touchdowns that they had were over 20 plus yards, 38 yards for one, 28 yards for, or 20 something yards for another. So it's, even on the ground, the first touchdown of the game with James Cook was a 23-yard rush. So that's an explosive play. And that was nice to see still from our offensive line and from our running back core that we haven't seen that much out of. And I think a lot of people still came away from this game looking at the offensive line and like the running back core thinking that they aren't quite giving what you expected to going, into the season. And I kind of looked over a few little things there and in this game specifically. And as a team, they rushed for, a good number of yards. They still put up
197, I believe.
Yeah, it was somewhere up that way. And so they still put down a lot of rushing yards. They just don't have a ton of explosive runs like Georgia fans are wanting to see on top of it. But here's the thing, Georgia fans. You wanted an explosive passing game, and you wanted to see all that play out differently with Todd Monken. You got that. Don't flip it to say now that you need a more explosive running game at the same time. It's hard to have both of those consistently. You get one, and if I had to pick one or the other, I'm going to pick the passing game because it's a lot more explosive and a lot more like damage done through the air in that area of it. So personally, you can't complain when you have close to 200 yards on the ground as well.
Well, and I think it's important also to realize is coming into the season, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that Georgia was lacking any talent whatsoever at the running back position. But what people were questioning was what are they going to look like at receiver, especially when Darnell Washington goes down weeks before the opener. George Pickens is going to be out. And then you also know Dominique Blaylock is going to take some time throughout the season to progress and get back to 100%. And then also Kyrus Jackson dealing with an injury, Arian Smith currently dealing with an injury. So there's a lot of questions there. So what's really important to see, and even Jermaine Burton at the beginning of the season was dealing with some injuries as well. So what's really good to see is that, you got to see JT Daniels fully in the offense. We didn't even know if he was going to play this last Saturday. And then he was announced a starter and just absolutely balled out, 303 passing yards. So that's also good to see. You finally get to see JT Daniels this season be absolutely explosive in this offense. But then also you're seeing tons of wide receivers. I mean, we know about Brock Bowers by now. We know what he can do. My gosh, what a freaking football player as a true freshman. Jermaine Burton got out there, and he's just absolutely balled out last Saturday. And then also you're adding in Adonai Mitchell as well, who looked really good. I mean, you're allowing the receiver position to gain a lot of depth right now. You're getting guys snaps and in-game reps that are going to be really important down the stretch of the season because – yeah, it'd be nice to have like Arian Smith 100% healthy, which he will be soon. I think that was more of just a precautionary thing of why he didn't play Saturday, dealing with a calf contusion. And so, but then something you also have to remember is Dominique Blaylock. I mean, he's on the verge of being 100% back. I mean, right now you just want to make sure that he's completely comfortable. You don't want to throw him out there, re-injure anything, of course, because he's taken such a long time for him to get back on the field. So getting him back is going to be really important. Kyrus Jackson is still continuing to heal. So once you have this unit completely together, your offense in passing wise is just going to be off the charts at that point. I mean, when you have this completely healthy wide receiver unit, and even if it isn't ever 100% completely healthy, now that you have all the guys and all the people that you need to make this successful. So that is probably going to also lead up to like the running game being able to open up more because, I mean, everybody knows Georgia's identity usually is to pound the ground, run the ball. But we're also seeing now where that's changing, and Georgia is no longer that team. They're proving it every single week now. And so teams are going to have to start respecting that at some point. And so that's a really good thing to see. So, yeah, the running game is struggling. Yeah, the offensive line has some question marks. But the passing game might help you improve that running game and kind of get it going as well. But really, it's nothing to worry about.
No, it's nothing to worry about. And once again, we're talking about an offense that people are coming back and saying, our running game is still not doing that great in a game that we had a 23-yard touchdown run to start the game. And then we had 197 yards rushing for Georgia as well. So when you have those on top of it and you have people coming back and saying, we don't have that great of a rushing offense this year. Well, isn't that what Georgia fans wanted, to shift it more to a passing focus? It was 303 yards passing for JT Daniels this week. Isn't that what people want to see? I mean, personally, I'm okay with the balance on that. 500 yards worth of offense is perfect for me. Like, I won't complain about that on offense. And it was funny, I was listening to 680 The Fan because Brooks Austin jumped on there for a few minutes tonight, which today is Wednesday, the September 22nd, about 7:26 right now. And about an hour ago, he jumped on there and he was talking about, they asked him, he said, you come away from a 27-point win against a SEC rival that the last time that they were in Athens, they beat you in your home, field. And you walk away from that game winning by 27 points upset. Like, people are upset and complaining about things. And as a fan base, you got to be able to enjoy those wins. You add extra stress to yourself when you just look at that and you say, we won, but I'm upset because of it. No, just sit back and enjoy it. The same thing I said when we, came away from Clemson with a win is, man, that was a top 5 team. I don't care what the offense looked like. I don't care how many points we put up or gave up or whatever on that part. Georgia won the game against a top 5 opponent. That's all that I cared about in that game, to be honest, as a fan. And coming away from South Carolina, I mean, what did you want them to do against South Carolina? You wanted them to beat them by 50, 60, which I get.
Probably to cover.
Yeah, I mean, but I said this originally, and I was talking to somebody, and I got a look from I think it was Georgia's tennis coach that was on the sideline area, and I was talking to somebody else, and they were asking about like the spread, and I was like, you take South Carolina by points in this game, and like the guy just looked, and I was like, by points.
Yeah.
Like, you're not taking South Carolina straight up, but like,
man,
31 points is a lot of
especially
points
for an SEC opponent.
Exactly, and especially knowing how Georgia has handled things in prior years. When it gets late in the game, they don't keep trying to score 60 points against teams like this. They usually slow down a little bit. And like, if you looked at, I looked up something when we get into the Georgia's full season of it. It was points by quarter on there. I think they scored about 106 points total on the year, and 7 of them were in the fourth quarter. Late in the game, the other team is still trying to score as aggressively as possible. Georgia's trying to run the clock and just get out of there, because the more you push, the more you do late in the game like that, the more you risk injury, and the more you push things to cause other issues that don't need to be there because you're so worried about covering the spread or something like that. No, they almost covered the spread. They would have covered the spread. However, there was from my opinion, and from what everybody else has said, a fumble that shouldn't have been a fumble for Kendall that led to 7 points, right? The only touchdown that Georgia's defense has given up all year came off of a fumble that shouldn't have been a turnover. Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, like, you can't be too concerned about not covering the spread and complaining about that. I mean, yeah, there's always stuff to worry about. Kirby said it best himself. A video surfaced, I think SEC Network posted it first, and it was him talking in the locker room. And he said, first of all, he said that, they were elite in several different places on it. But he said, when I turn on the tape, there will be areas for improvement, room for improvement in different areas on there. And so then he went on to say the different areas that there was positives and elite play, inside the 20s on both sides, offense and defense. He said that was elite, that kind of thing. But he said the thing is, you're practicing and training not to beat somebody, but you're practicing to beat everybody. So yeah, the coach is going to sit there and pick apart things in there and say, hey, we have these issues. This needs to be improved, because there's always going to be room for improvement. But as a fan, after watching it, let them just enjoy the win. Well, you don't have to be concerned about all that as much as Kirby and the team does. Know that they're handling it and enjoy it.
Well, and also you have to remember, Shane Beamer used to work with Kirby Smart. So you're not going to see Kirby Smart running up the score or trying anything late in the game either. He wants to show his respect to Shane Beamer as well, knowing also that he is rebuilding a program at the time. But I think it's a good time to shift over to the defense, only because I bring up Shane Beamer. And a clip surfaced, I believe, Saturday night. It was Shane Beamer doing his press conference, and I'm not going to quote the whole thing or anything like that, and I'm sure most of you have seen it because it's just absolutely hysterical, only because you really don't ever see head coaches be so honest like Shane Beamer was after the game. And basically he was asked if Georgia's defense did anything special to stop their offense, and he basically left it at they have 105 stars, they have a 300-pound plus human being that runs like nobody's business, and they have studs all over the field. So no, they didn't do anything special. They're just a really freaking good football team. So, and I think that just perfectly sums up Georgia's defense. And it's really nice to hear that coming from another head coach. It's one thing to hear your own head coach say, like, oh yeah, we're really talented on defense. We know that. But I mean, for Shane Beamer to put it in that perspective, basically saying like, no, they don't do anything special. They're just really freaking good. So I thought that was hysterical. I appreciated Shane Beamer just being 100% honest with himself and with everybody, and basically putting it into perspective, like, guys, these people are really good. Like, don't take them lightly or try and think that they do anything magical on defense. Like, they're just really freaking good.
Yeah, it's not that they're not doing anything crazy to perform the way they are. It's just the Joes are better and the X's and O's are normal, but the Joes are out there like, you know, the Jimmies and Joes are the ones out there like they're just good players on top of it. The scheming isn't insane. Now there's some great schemes drawn up, but it's not like something new. That's what he said. He was like, they're not drawing up brand new schemes. You know, if you watch Brooks Austin's film breakdowns this week when he covered the defense, and because he mentioned something on this too, and he was looking at it and he was like, look at this play specifically right here, right? And he's like, all right, 5 guys come in, 5 offensive linemen right here. They have the right protection called. They slide the right way. They pick up the Mike ID with Nakobe Dean coming downhill from the middle linebacker spot. But guess what? The center just gets absolutely beat immediately.
He just beelines for him and goes by
Couldn't
him.
stop him because the guy was just that athletic and just basically it looked like he almost ran by him. But they had the right type of protection built in. They were prepared for that play, but it came down to the Jimmies and Joes at that point. He just beat him on that part.
Which Georgia has a lot of. And, I mean, you could just go down the list. I mean, of the amount of players that just had an outstanding game. Nolan Smith was one of them, had an outstanding game. One in particular who I loved watching the entire night was anytime 41 Channing Tindall was on the field. I mean, I made a tweet saying, like, Channing Tindall looks like he's trying to catch a murder case tonight. Because every single time he was on the field, he was putting hat on hat, coming to catch a body every single time, and he was looking to hurt somebody as well. So I love watching Channing Tindall play, and there's just tons of them that you can watch. I mean, everybody loves watching Jordan Davis just absolutely manhandle whoever's in front of him and getting to the quarterback at will. Devontae Wyatt is looking really good. Brooks Austin talked about his get off is just absolutely different compared to anybody else.
He's got a quick first step.
Yeah, next time you watch Georgia, just watch 95 and watch him get off the line. I mean, it is elite, like stuff you don't see from anybody else. I mean, it's insane. I mean, so just from top to bottom, this defense is just all around really good. Now, of course, there's also going to be some weaknesses elsewhere. Like you're trying to figure out the cornerback 2 spot. Who's going to play across from Darian Kendrick? We looked at Amir Speed. He had some iffy moments throughout the game, got burned a couple times. Keely Ringo came in. He also had his moments of his own. So they're still trying to figure that out. But, I mean, really, if there's any defense right now in the entire nation where you can just say, like, these guys have it figured out and you know without a doubt every time that they're going on the field that they can get you a stop, it's Georgia's defense right now. I mean, I really don't know if we've ever seen anything like this. And I know that 2017 Georgia defense was really, really good, mostly because you have Roquan Smith on the field, Lorenzo Carter, and a bunch of older guys. But I mean, this defense has seniors and juniors, I believe, from top to bottom, aside from some substitutions with Keely Ringo being a freshman and some other guys. But this is a veteran defense who it's just stacked across the board. I mean, you have insane depth at the defensive line position. You have the insane depth at linebacker. You're building up your depth with cornerbacks. I think when Tyke Smith gets back, you'll be able to move guys around some more. You'll be able to figure out some things a lot more and really get into your groove. It's kind of scary to say that Georgia hasn't gotten into the groove on defense, but they've got guys that are not healthy right now that will be healthy, and it's just going to add even more toys that they can play with on defense and make them even more elite.
Yeah, for sure. And when you watch back those plays too, because you talk about, the other cornerback spot with, Speed and Keely Ringo having some issues, and they definitely did. Where they got beat on all the plays that they got beat on, they're basically playing man-to-man press coverage. And the person, like the wide receiver, is one step and then they're behind them. Mm-hmm. And so they're playing, catch up. And that's what, and it seems to be like a coaching scheme of what they're trying to do and how they do it. And think back to when Tyson Campbell was there and everyone mm-hmm. was so concerned with him about, how he would cover. And you sit there and go, man, at least 3 or 4 times during the season, you're like, man, that was a pick. Instead, at least 3 in his last year there that I watched, at least 3 were pass interference calls that would have been picked off, because all he had to do, if he was watching the ball at all or looking over his shoulder at all, instead mm-hmm. of just face guarding, basically, the ball hit him in the back when he's running through the receiver, basically. Literally would hit him in the back. So that it's a coaching style for Georgia, that's how they do it. But when it comes to those 2 players, they're not doing very well in that type of coverage. Mm-hmm. It's the first step. Literally go back and watch the first big play they made in the first quarter where it's Amir Speed who gets beat on that go route. It's literally a go route, and the ball is thrown immediately, basically within like a second of the snap. He mm-hmm. snaps it. The wide receiver takes 2 steps and has already got, behind the defensive back. and the ball's thrown, it's lobbed up until he runs under it. And that's the only reason it was as deep as it was, because it was literally thrown that quick. Go back and watch it. It's instant. Also, peep your boy in the background when they land on the ground. I'm in that picture as well. So, but anyway, so like you can see that. And so you're like, all right, they're struggling, but that's their biggest issue, is that one piece of their game. Other than that, I don't see an issue. It's that one thing. It's that first step when they're playing press, like man coverage.
And I think Brooks really put it perfectly. And he said, now it is worrisome that Georgia does have question marks that really don't seem to be getting fixed at this point in the season. But it's also 2 out of 22 positions. One of those being at right guard on the offensive line. The other one being the cornerback 2 spot. I mean, 2 out of 22, that's pretty freaking good if you ask me. And then also he mentioned with Speed and Ringo is that when they do play press man coverage, is that typically you want, especially a guy like Amir Speed or Keely Ringo, who have really good length and size for a cornerback, which is what Kirby Smart and them absolutely love in their cornerbacks, is you want them being physical right off the line. And that's something that you didn't see at all from Speed when he got burned, and also what you didn't see from Ringo when he got burned, is they just try and start running with the receiver, don't put any hands or anything on them, and it's too late by the time they do put a hand on them, and they're already burned, and they're just playing catch-up down the field trying to make a shoelace tackle. So by that, it seems like, okay, that seems like an easy fix, which it may be. I mean, I don't know. I'm not the football guru. I don't break down the film or anything like that. But you would have to think that that probably is an easy fix, something that isn't like a make or break thing for Georgia at this point. They have the guys, they have the talent to fill that position, and you're only going to get better as the weeks go on. I mean, Ringo's getting more reps. That's really important. And then also Speed. I mean, it's good to have competition. You know, it's good for Speed to know that, okay, Ringo's getting in a lot as well. So, like, if I want to staple myself into the starting lineup for the rest of the year, I need to perform as well. So they've got that edge about them. They have that competition going, which I think is really beneficial as well. But nonetheless, the defense is just absolutely freaking unreal.
Yeah, and it's one of two things that for the cornerback spot that can be done with it. Like from my perspective, and once again, I'm not that football guru that's breaking down all the film either. But like you can have one of two things happen on that first play. That was a big play that would have honestly prevented it from happening. As one is just the cornerback just taking both hands and just shoving them directly into the chest of the wide receiver as soon as they got off that line. That will cause him, like they're big receivers, they're not going to like fly backwards, obviously, but it'll pop him off his line. It'll slow it down that first step.
Make him redirect at least.
It'll redirect him and slow him down.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you don't have him 2 steps in and already behind you. So that's number one. And those 2 cornerbacks can easily do it and do it very well. Some corners can't do that because they'll reach their arms out and their arms will get swatted down. And all of a sudden that puts them out of position. I think that might be the concern. This is speculation because I don't know what's going on in that coaching, room and when they're breaking stuff down on these players. But that could put them out of position. So maybe that's keeping them from doing it. But that would prevent it if they could get that good shock in right off the bat. And then they could have that step. Basically, it gives them a little bit more time to get back themselves. Or 2, just be a lot more prepared for that first step backwards themselves, expecting them to kind of be running on a go type thing more. And that's also somewhat dangerous as well, because if your first step is immediate, like too far back, and say they hit that foot in the ground one, and then they hit a slant across the middle, at that point you're 2 yards behind them on a slant. You're in trouble there too. Yep. So it once again, I'm not the football guy the same way that these coaches are. And Brooks pointed this out perfectly. As far as who's on the staff, there's not a school in college football that has better defensive back coaches than Georgia, between its head coach, who was a great defensive back when he played, between Muschamp, who is now on the field for everything as well as a great defensive back coach. You got Jamil Adai, who is the actual defensive back coach, who was phenomenal, came from West Virginia, who led the nation in passing defense from a air raid defense or setting out there. And even Schumann, he said even Schumann was a great defensive back coach, even though he's a linebacker coach. So you have all of those guys in the room. You can't get much better coaching. So I'm going to trust their judgment on whatever they're doing. It's speculation on our part of what we can see, but I'm sure they're looking at it and going, yeah, these idiots right here, why would we do that when, this hasn't really had too much of an issue with it, yet here we are. And once again, it was South Carolina. It didn't end up biting them. Georgia's defense is that good that once they got those big plays, they settled for field goals. Yep. That's it. That's all they gave up on there. And I'll tie in there was one stat that really, really stood out to me on the defensive side that's worth noting on both sides of it, for them and for Georgia, for South Carolina and Georgia. Georgia had 3 sacks. But the bigger story too there is the ones that the almost sacks, because we talked about this once before. The quarterback hurries. This is the second week. I think it was Clemson where they had about 26 as well. They had 26 quarterback hurries on top of their 3 sacks this week. The crazy stat line, right? So you talk about like the offensive line, and I think the biggest issue for Georgia as a whole was the offensive line in general, not necessarily just the right guard. It's become the right guard because of Tate Ratledge getting hurt almost 2-3 plays into the season and being out. So they had to plug in some spots there at that position. Otherwise, the offensive line might be better than it actually would look. So I'm going to give them a little bit of a break on the offensive line as a whole. They are struggling in rushing, like run blocking some to open up those gaps in different ways. Their pass blocking can't get much better. Yes, Warren Erickson is a little bit of a liability in those downs. Like lately, he's been hunted, and like the sacks are coming directly over top of him when they come in there on the passing downs. Outside of the 1 sack that Warren Erickson allowed, 0 quarterback hurries.
It's phenomenal.
No quarterback hurries in a game where we were throwing the ball very well. So to me, the offensive line definitely has a lot of questions, and they need somebody to step up at one or two positions on there in order to propel them the rest of the way. But as far as pass blocking goes, they had 1 error by the right guard that led to a sack. But other than that, they didn't even have a hurry. JT Daniels didn't even get hit. That means he didn't get hit. If there was no hurries, he didn't get hit other than the sack.
Yeah, you're protecting the main guy.
If you can tell me Georgia's offense will allow 1 sack per game, and that'll be the only issue in pass protection that they have, where 0 quarterback hit. Other than that, every time I'll sign that contract right now. Sign me up for it. Other than that, the game plan on both sides of the line for Georgia to me wasn't that bad. It really wasn't.
No, and so it shows you also that it's not just a complete mess when talking about the offensive line. They were really good in pass pro last year as well, and so they're showing that again this year, that they are really good in pass pro. And also, this is, again, something that is fixable. I don't know how they're going to fix it or when they're going to fix it or how they're going to go about it. You can shift some people around the line, I think, that'll plug in better in positions, that'll put people in some better positions where you're not having a liability on offensive line. I don't know if they're going to do that or how they're going to go about that. I won't get into detail about that. But so I think this is also good. We're talking about question marks. I think it's a good time to talk about college football as a whole right now and talk about the number of question marks that surround college football right now. I mean, I don't think that in the college football playoff era at least, I don't think we have ever seen a season like this. And 3 weeks in at least, I know that. I mean, there's still a long way to go in the season, of course, but still 3 weeks in, there's a whole lot of question marks and a whole lot of, I don't even know where this is going right now, and I don't know how it's going to end.
We kind of talked about this going into the season, and to kind of tie back to an old episode there, we looked at it and said, and there was a reason that we came on here and said that this is a year that it's a playoff or bust season for Georgia.
Yep.
The reason for that is, one, the talent on the roster, like top to bottom, backups, starters, everywhere around, outside of a few little position group that had some, issues we talked about with defensive back and stuff like that appeared out of nowhere for them, which they've done a fairly good job handling for the most part. They've got the roster, they've got the talent, they've got like the coaches, they've got everything that they need to put something together on that. But the other side of it is college football this year. Going into the year, there was a lot of restarting for a lot of big teams that opened the door for Georgia to make a run on that playoff spot. That is playing out to be true. Once again, like I'm going back to, we talked about this before, and it's happening. Clemson's already dropping. They lost to Georgia week 1.
Look good.
They looked really bad against Georgia Tech. They were basically one play away from having that game tied up in the fourth quarter with Georgia Tech, and they only scored 14 points on them, or 13 points.
And Georgia Tech lost to Northern Illinois in their season opener.
Yeah. So you look at that team challenged them in that way as well. So we talked about that because they were starting over on offense pretty heavily, with DJU being, the quarterback, who's a highly touted quarterback. He might develop into being a very, very good quarterback for him down the road, but it's his first year as a full starter. So that's number one. They lost their all-time leader in rushing yards, like the ACC's all-time leader in rushing yards, in Travis Etienne, and just a few little things as well throughout the offense and wide receiver and everything like that. So when you have all of that happen, you look at that team as saying they're resetting on offense. That's one team that we have an advantage over. Then you look down to Bama and you go, okay, Bama is, they came out strong to start the season as well. But one thing that we've learned about Bama at this point is, one, their rush defense is a little suspect. Mm-hmm. But they also had to start over on offense themselves with a new quarterback in Bryce Young, who is a great quarterback once again, but Mac Jones just left, who was a finalist for the Heisman. They lost Smith,
Jalen Waddle, Najee Harris. Go down the list.
Their offense, they had to reload everywhere on offense, which they are the ones that can do that consistently. So they'll still be a powerhouse, but they're slightly a step below where they would have been with all of those guys and all of them leaving at one time.
No doubt.
Ohio State, they lost their starting quarterback after a few years, and they're struggling clearly in that way as well. In Oklahoma, starting over at quarterback and other positions with them as well. So you have all these teams that are basically having to re-plug in quarterback. That's the hardest one to reset with.
Most important
all
position.
Of these quarterbacks could be very good by the time they leave these schools, but they're young. It just opens up a door for Georgia in that spot. Guess what? Clemson, not looking good. We just said that.
Yeah.
Ohio State looking terrible. And Oklahoma looking terrible. Then you have Bama, who had looked really good in the first couple weeks, and they showed some signs of imperfection in week 3 against Florida. They started strong. They went up 21-3 or something like that in early on in that game. I think it was first quarter. And then they let Florida creep back in because Florida ran for 40 or 42 times for like 245 yards or something in that nature. I think I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and they struggled to stop it.
Yeah, and this is where it just gets crazy because, you just look at the rankings right now. You have Alabama 1, Georgia 2, Oregon sitting at 3 right now. Is Iowa 4 right now? I'm trying to think.
Iowa is number 5.
Okay, so Oklahoma's at 4, correct?
Yeah.
So Oklahoma's at 4, Iowa's at 5. You got Penn State in the top 10 right now. And then you also have...
I think they're like 7 or something.
Yeah.
Maybe somewhere in that range. I don't know.
Cincinnati's also... Or Cincinnati is up there, or is it? I'm trying to think.
I think they're in the top 10.
Okay.
I'll pull it up real quick while you're talking.
Okay. And then I believe it's Clemson and Ohio State rounding it out at 9 and 10 right now. So you just want to talk about a huge doors open right now for anybody to take it. Now is the opportunity for teams to really... Okay, so let's see. We got it pulled up right now. Okay, yeah, Penn State's at 6, Texas A&M 7, Cincinnati is at 8, and then, like I said, Clemson and Ohio State rounding out at 9 and 10. Clemson being at 9, Ohio State at 10. Door is wide open right now, and there's just a lot of teams where you're like, they have a pretty favorable schedule right now to win out. And so it's just really, to me, I love it. I think it's going to be absolutely madness. I especially am going to love it when 2 SEC teams get put in. And then you have someone like Oklahoma, who very well still could go undefeated throughout their season. Like I said, they have a very favorable remaining schedule as well for them. I think their toughest game probably remaining on the schedule is Texas, maybe. I think there's another one that I'm forgetting about right now. But they're still probably going to be favored in those games. And so you're talking about Oklahoma could very well go undefeated undefeated this year and get left out of the playoff. A one-loss Clemson, assuming they don't lose, which looks like to me right now, for them going undefeated the remainder of the year, doesn't look very, very likely right now, but still could go undefeated the remainder of their season. They probably are getting left out right now, too, if they continue to struggle like they do. Ohio State, I think they played Penn State this year, I believe, if you want to check that for me. But I believe they play Penn State this year, so that'll be a big game if they do play each other.
They do in a few weeks. So the Georgia-Florida weekend, Saturday, October 30th, is Ohio State and Penn State.
So that'll be a really telling matchup for the Big Ten right there. And so, but nonetheless,
I don't think Penn State's that good either. Is the thing.
No, and they beat Auburn, but Auburn is probably, like Brooks said, 6th best team in the SEC right now. I think that was
generous.
And I
think that was generous because he basically just, because I was listening to that too, and he basically said, 5 SEC West teams and then Georgia. I mean, you got to think that, to be honest with you, Auburn might not be better than Arkansas right now, which I think they play each other this year as well. Well, I think they do. Yes. And so that'll be or they definitely play each other. They're in the West. They're in the West. Of course they play. I think they might lose that game. We talked about that when we broke down the season there. And then Kentucky. I think Kentucky is probably a better team as well. So they might be as low as the 8th ranked SEC team by the end of the season as well. And Penn State barely beat them.
Yeah, so
At
that's
home in a whiteout, which is
your
big
biggest
environment.
game of the year.
Yeah.
When you do a whiteout at Penn State, I mean, it is stapled in as that's your biggest game of the year. Environment's going nuts. I mean, I'd love to be in the middle of those stands for that type of game. But so yeah, you edge them out. You beat them by 7, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But is it really that great of a win, honestly? So I mean, Ohio State and Penn State, that matchup, of course, will be very telling. But nonetheless, my point is, if Ohio State goes undefeated, I mean, there are just so many teams on here where you're like, okay, well, yeah, you went undefeated, but it really didn't look all that pretty. And if you're going to do that to teams like Cincinnati who go undefeated, you're like, well, we can't let you in because you kind of struggled in your schedule. You really didn't look all that impressive. Well, then, by gosh, you better do it to teams like Ohio State and Oklahoma. You have to be equal on those types of things at this point, especially when you're having a season like this, and especially if this trend continues. And then also you jump over to Oregon, which is kind of a touchy subject because I kind of clowned the fact that
I was going to let you start that one.
Or even the fact that Oregon could possibly be in the playoff. But I will say this. I'll defend myself. I said there's no way that Oregon gets in with 2 losses, which I still stand by that. I don't think they get in with 2 losses. But nonetheless, they're sitting at 3 right now. And the Pac-12, I don't see anybody competing with them right now.
That's their lifeline to it is Oregon getting into, the playoffs. Oregon's the lifeline for the Pac-12 right now. And I'm with you. I don't think that there's another team in the Pac-12 because UCLA lost now and they didn't look good. So I don't know that there's that many teams in the Pac-12 that are going to really compete with them at that level right now because UCLA lost to Fresno State, I believe, which isn't that the team that didn't Oregon play them first and they struggled against them?
Yes.
So maybe Fresno State's just a little bit better than people expect on that part, but they gave Oregon a run for their money and then they beat UCLA. And so now UCLA is taking a step back. I definitely don't see Oregon having 2 losses, which is why I think that they might have a really good chance at getting into the playoffs now.
Oh, and they have their big win. They went to Ohio State and beat them. So that's another big thing to talk about. Yeah, they have a notable win, which Ohio State does not have right now.
Clemson's not going to have.
And they better hope that Penn State, if they beat them, they better hope that Penn State stays within the top 10, or else they're not going to have a notable win throughout the rest of the season, unless Michigan somehow continues to just absolutely blow out, which I'm not buying that right now either.
I'm selling that stock, as Brooks would say.
As Brooks would say, we're selling on that. But so if I'm Ohio State and Oklahoma right now, I am really worried because I'm not sure winning out is enough for you to get in the playoff as in past years where it was like, oh, yeah, we just have to win out, win our conference or whatever, and we're a shoo-in. It's not looking like the case right now at all. And so if I'm Oklahoma or Ohio State, I am really worried. You better hope you start beating teams that you should beat by 40 or 30 like you should. And then also you better hope that you have an opponent at some point in this season that is ranked within the top 10 or at least top 15 to give you a notable win. And you better win your conference. So –
well, and to jump in on it as well, one thing that the AP poll alone has showed us that has actually been refreshing this year that we've seen is they're giving credit to one. They gave credit, and people don't want to hear this probably. They gave credit to Florida in the sense that they did come down to a 2-point game against the number 1 team in the country, so they stayed in the same spot on the polls after the loss, which I think was fair at 11. I think that's fair.
Number 1 team,
the number 1 team, and it was a close game, so I think that's fair to keep them. Now they definitely shouldn't have risen into the top 10, which some people were asking
do that for a loss.
Never should they go up after the loss on there. But I agree with maybe keeping them at 11 there. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
But after watching what the AP poll has done to both Oklahoma and to Ohio State and Clemson, when Clemson lost to Georgia, they dropped to 6. After beating Georgia Tech by 3, they are now what would we say, like 9?
They're 9 or 10. I can't remember.
I think they're 9.
I think they're 9 right now though.
And I think Ohio State was 10 or something like that.
Ohio State's 10.
So, and Ohio State, who lost one game and then they won another, but they're struggling against these teams. They're dropping because they're struggling against these teams that they should be beating handedly. And Oklahoma did the same. They dropped back after winning because they're still undefeated. They dropped back a little bit, noted not a ton, but a little bit, to let Georgia jump in front of them based on them winning against a team that they should have blown out but not doing so.
Yep.
That's been refreshing to see, something that we have seen, the College Football Playoff Committee do consistently as well, is look at the team as a whole and has actually been kind of fair on it as well. It's a positive sign to see I don't see Georgia missing the playoffs, even if they end up with one loss to a Bama in the SEC championship game. I think that would still be, especially the way things are playing out. Yeah. I think that they're in at that point. And I think there's a really good shot for a team like Oregon or something to get in. I definitely would say that there's going to be a second SEC team. I would almost lock in the fact that there's going to be a second SEC team in the playoffs this year.
By the looks of things, yes.
Because you're going to have a team like Bama and Georgia who neither one of those teams is having 2 losses this year. That's all I'm going to say. They're not having 2 losses, so I think it's highly possible that it's those teams unless a Bama or somebody comes in and struggles against an Ole Miss or a Texas A&M or something. Those are bigger games. And so that could create some question marks in that side of it. But even if it's not Bama, somehow, there's another SEC team coming in, because if it's not Bama, that means either Ole Miss or Texas A&M overtook them. And if they did, that means that's the team that's going to slip in then. Like that'll be the team that has the argument to get in. You could almost make an argument for 3 teams from the SEC if it gets down to a Georgia and Alabama undefeated season playing against each other in the SEC championship game. And maybe you have an Ole Miss that only has 1 loss afterwards. At that point, they have a strong argument to be right there at the end of it. And quite frankly, I'm excited to watch. I know we talked about a very notable game. This will be the last thing I say, and I'll pass it back to you to wrap everything else up on it. The notable game we put in the West was Texas A&M versus Alabama. I'm really excited for the Ole Miss Alabama game because we saw what they did before. We saw Bama still struggle a little bit on defense and still giving up a decent number of points on their defense, to where it's going to come down once again to whether or not Bama can score enough to win that game, which they are very capable of. Let me state that very clearly. They are capable of scoring plenty of points as well. But that game's going to be a shootout. Mark my words, that game is a shootout with both teams scoring 40 points.
And I said this at the beginning of the year that I thought definitely that Texas A&M would probably be the game that Alabama would have to circle on their calendar. Right now, I'm not so sure. They're missing their starting quarterback right now. Not really sure how that's going to play out. They really struggled when he went down. Barely edged out a victory against Colorado. But yeah, Ole Miss right now, if I'm on Ole Miss's schedule, I am absolutely terrified because those are the teams that are really, really dangerous. I don't care what their record says when you play them. A team that can just willingly put up 50 points or 40-plus points with ease, like nobody's business, that's dangerous, especially when you're talking about getting in a shootout with them. So if I'm Alabama, and especially now, I think it's a really important matchup for Alabama after we just saw Florida expose them in their run game. They have a really good running back. I think his name's Eli. It's something along those lines. I don't really know, or maybe Eli, something like that. He's really freaking good, and Matt Corral is really freaking good. I said this to my buddy the other day that Matt Corral probably is in the Heisman conversation right now because a lot of your projected Heisman finalists like Spencer Rattler, Sam Howell, DJU right now really are struggling.
They're struggling.
So who else would you put in there right now? I think Matt Corral definitely has to be one. Maybe you can throw in JT Daniels right now. Bryce Young, of course, he's playing up to how he's supposed to. He's looking good. But, yeah, I think Matt Corral is probably in the Heisman conversation right now after 3 weeks into the season. But, yeah, Ole Miss, I think, is very dangerous for anybody in the West right now and for any SEC opponent, just of how scary and talented their offense is, especially when you have someone like Lane Kiffin as your head coach. And we know the type of head coach he is. He's just an offensive mastermind. So, yeah, I think the Ole Miss matchup for Alabama is the one to circle on your calendars right now. Not the Texas A&M right now. I'm going to hold on that one.
I don't think we're selling. If we want to go to buy, hold, or sell, I don't think we're selling on that game yet. But I would say hold.
Hold
I'm
on
not
it
sure
right now.
Yet. Yeah.
But I'm putting the Ole Miss game in that conversation right now, and I think that they can also kind of start putting in that conversation, like you said, as maybe. Now this is a long shot right now. I mean, it's really early to say this in week 3, but there may be a team that could have 1 loss at the end of the year, not necessarily make the SEC championship game, but be sitting on the outside with 1 loss. It all would just depend on what else the rest of college football does in every other conference. But definitely,
and then we get to sit back on our couch and watch
just the madness unfold.
Oh, can you imagine? Because the argument has been insane over the past few years about having that second SEC team get in there.
Yeah.
And then it did happen with Georgia and Alabama back in 2017.
And they proved that those were undoubtedly the best 2
teams.
And
they went and played on into the national championship game. Exactly. They both deserved to be there that year. They were those teams. And so it'll be interesting to see that, like, once again, I would almost lock in that there's going to be 2 SEC teams because of the way things are playing out, because I do think that Georgia and Bama end up getting there undefeated. And so at that point, whoever loses that game, they have the right to be in the playoffs, especially with the way other things are playing out around college football. And at that point, it comes down to a one-loss Clemson team if they go the rest of the way undefeated, maybe an undefeated Oklahoma. And I will say that if there's an undefeated Oklahoma who wins their conference championship, they'll be in. You can go ahead and lock them in as a 3rd spot, because even though they've struggled some, like I don't see them leaving them out.
I'm telling you, it's gonna.
I think they should. Potentially, it's an argument.
It's gonna depend on what Oregon does. It's gonna depend on what Iowa does. It's gonna depend on what Ohio State does. It's gonna depend on what Cincinnati does at this point. I'm telling you, I am not convinced that an undefeated Oklahoma. Granted that they continue to struggle. That's the key part. If they continue to struggle like they are right now, I don't know that an undefeated season for Oklahoma would be enough in a scenario where you have just a ton of teams that are 1 loss or no loss at all. So
it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think they'll guaranteed the 1-loss team going to be in there once again is going to be whoever loses the SEC championship game. To me, that's the lock. And so there will be a 1-loss team in there. The rest of them, because think about that. Like say Oregon goes undefeated. Oklahoma goes undefeated. Clemson wins out.
Say freaking Iowa goes undefeated and wins
Iowa
the Big
goes
Ten.
undefeated, right? So you have those 4 teams fighting for that last spot.
Dude, this makes me so excited. I so hope this happens.
2 spots, because I didn't put Oklahoma in there yet.
2 spots. That made me so excited.
I think at that point you have a lock of unless Oklahoma like changes something. I think the lock of the next undefeated team at that point, I think they would give credit to either Iowa or Oregon, and they would give them the edge because of what we've been seeing from Oklahoma so far. Once again, there's still 9 games in the regular season plus a conference championship for all of these teams. So 10 more games to be played before we get to this point. So this is a huge speculation on like the rest of the season.
Oh, yeah.
This is a huge what if scenario.
No doubt.
But
tons of football to be played. But
right.
It's still exciting.
But the scenario could be insane for those last couple of spots, because you're going to have those teams right there. Plus you're going to, what if there's another SEC team that only has 1 loss on either side, the West or the East? At that point,
game on, baby.
That 4th, I think that the 3rd spot will be competitive enough for like the lock, but then that 4th spot potentially this year could be the most competitive playoff like spot in the history of college football playoff, legitimately. And I stand by that. And like, there's been controversy where Georgia thought they should be in with 2 losses before, where Texas A&M was the 5th team left out last year, and like this happens consistently, where it's been a big argument and stuff. But I think that there will be more teams in that argument this year than there have ever been before, because of the way things are playing out right now. Because it's opened the door for teams like Oregon to have a genuine shot.
Could you imagine like having like 8 teams that you have a legit case to be in the college football playoff? I really hope that happens, because I just want to.
Just sparks bigger debate on the 12 team or 18 playoff.
Yeah, and it's just going to spark even more conversation of like, this is why we need to expand the playoff and blah, blah, which it is going to anyways. But so nonetheless, I just want to see it happen, because one, Twitter would be an absolute field day just to read everything that was going through, all the takes coming through. And then just to imagine the media trying to pick 4 teams out of potentially 8. I'm here for it, man. I want to see it. I think that would be just an absolute blast.
We'll wrap it up with this on it. And after having a COVID-filled season last year it was fun to have college football at all, but it was a very different type of season, and it wasn't exactly what everyone wanted as like a whole season. There was no fans in the stands, that kind of thing. So it was a very different, a lot less like exciting of a full season. This one's one that's going to be fun to buckle in
back, baby,
and see how it all comes down to at the end of it.
Is back.
And that's all I got to say. I think it's going to be a fun year. We're quarter way through, and it's going to be an exciting one to watch.
No doubt. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, as always, Jeremiah Stoddard, Jonathan Williams here. Catch us again next week. We will break down, the Vanderbilt beatdown. We didn't even touch on that because it's Vanderbilt. They're going to win by 90. That's an exaggeration, but they're going to want to win by 90 after last year. So we'll catch you guys on that part with a recap of it, and then looking forward to the rest of the season as well after that. Catch us on social media on Facebook.com/, Dogs Daily POD, and then also on Twitter at Dogs Daily POD. You can also reach out to us directly on there as well. We love, socializing with everybody on there as well. Make sure you reach out to our guy here. We got this from Georgia Autographs, and it is a Nick Chubb autographed Eclipse replica helmet. It is amazing in person. It looks good on camera, but looks incredible in person.
So
make sure you check his stuff out. It's definitely worth it. His site has incredible stuff on there right now. He's also got a autograph signing and meet and greet set up for October 3rd, so just in a couple weeks, for Adam Anderson. Still on the team. Guess what? NIL stuff, he can have him set up at the Hyatt Place in Athens on October 3rd. Make sure you check it out. We're going to stop by and see everything and see what's going on there, so you should as well. But until next week, keep it classy in the Classic City, and go Dogs.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Dogs Daily on Sports Illustrated. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Dogs Daily crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at Jeremiah_Stod7, to Kyle at DK Fubderberg, and Jonathan at 22_Jman. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime, go Dogs.